Welcome to Prism Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 56 of ASP.NET Gridview tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss about implementing paging in a gridview control and then controlling the page size and page numbers using a drop-down list. Let me explain what I mean. In part 55 of the ASP.NET Gridview tutorial, we discussed about implementing custom sorting and paging in a gridview control. Now in that part, when we were designing the web form, we have set the page size of the gridview control to be 3. And then after that, when the application is running, the end user doesn't have any option of changing the page size at runtime. We have set the page size to 3, so the page size is always going to be 3. But then what I want to do right now is I want to make that page size configurable. We want to display different page sizes within the drop down list, for example like 5, 10, 15, 20, etc. And then when the user selects 10 as the page size, then within the grid view control we want to display 10 rows. So the page size should be configurable. So depending on the page size, we should be able to compute the number of pages available for the end user to navigate, and then we should display those page numbers in another drop down list, so he can select the page that he want to navigate to using that drop down list. So obviously the first thing to do is to redesign the web form. Now, we will be modifying the example that we used in part 55, so please watch part 55 before proceeding with this video. Alright, now let's flip to the ASP.NET Web Application project, and now on this web form 1, I'm going to include a table. So the best way to align these elements, all these user interface elements properly, is by using a table. So I'm going to create a table, and this table is going to contain 2 rows. The first row will have 4 TDs to include this text page size, a drop down list, and then this text again page number, and then another drop down list. And then the second TR will contain only 1 TD. So let's design the table first. So table, and this table is going to contain 2 table rows. That's the first table row, and there's the second table row. Now the first table row should contain how many TDs? 4 TDs, because we have 4 user interface elements there: the text page size drop down list, the text page number, and then another drop down list. So let's include 4 TDs, and just to speed things up, I have these TDs already typed, so let me copy them and paste that into the first TR. So let me properly format this HTML by pressing Ctrl K and D, and look at what we are doing here. We are essentially including 4 TDs there. And then if you look at the first TD, we have that text page size. Second TD, we need to have a drop down list. So let me drag and drop a drop down list onto this web form, and let's call this DDL page size, because we are going to use this drop down list to display the page sizes 5, 10, 15, 20, etc. Alright, and then in the third TD, I've set this text page number, and this is encapsulated inside a strong HTML tag, meaning we want that to be bolded. And then we have set the color to something like A55129, which will basically display something like this. So I have page size, page number, and then in the last TD we need a drop down list. So let's drag and drop a drop down list into the last TD of the first row. And then I'm going to call this drop down list as DDL page numbers. Okay, so that's the first TR. And in the second TR, what should we have? We should have the grid view control itself. So the grid view control itself. And then look at this. If you remember, in part 55, we used a repeater control to display the page numbers at the bottom of the grid view control. Now we are displaying the page numbers in another drop down list. So we can get rid of that repeater control altogether. So on our web form, what I am going to do is I'm going to get rid of this repeater control, because we no longer require that. And then I'm going to cut the HTML of the grid view control, and then we are going to put that inside the TD of the second row. So in the second row, how many TDs we need? We need only 1 TD. Okay, and the width of that TD should span across the width of the 4 TDs in the first row. And to specify that, I'm going to include a TD here, and then I'm going to set column span is equal to 4. Alright, Now let me go ahead and paste the HTML of the grid view control within this TD. Okay, let's select everything, press Ctrl K and D to format the HTML properly. So now if I flip this web form to the design mode, look at this, the design of this web form is like how we wanted it. So we have page size, drop down list, page number, and then another drop down list, as you can see here. But then the page size, I want to set this at design time. For example, I want to display 5, 10, 15, and 20 as the page sizes. And to do that, click on the drop down list tasks button, click on edit items, and then I want to add the first item as 5 and the second item as 10, third item as 15, and finally the last one 20. Okay, and then I'm also going to set the auto post back property of this drop down list to true, because we want the web form to be posted automatically and then display the correct number of selected rows within the grid view control. Okay, and then page numbers, we cannot set that at design time, because depending on the rows, the number of rows that we have in the database table and the page size that we have selected within the drop down list, we need to compute the number of pages available and then bind them to this drop down list. So we can do that only at runtime. And then another thing I'm going to set for this grid view control is set the page size of the grid view control to 5 as well. So at the moment it's 3, let's change that to 5. So we are almost done designing this web form. Now let's flip to the code behind file, and then obviously we have got rid, let's save everything now, we have got rid of the repeater control. And then if you look at a method here, data bind repeater, if you remember what we have been doing in this method, we were computing the number of pages available and then we were binding the page numbers to this repeater. But then at the moment we don't have the repeater control itself, so I'm going to get rid of this code from here. And then now, instead of using the repeater control to display page numbers, we are going to use a drop down list control. Okay, so now in the previous sessions of the ASP.NET video tutorial, we discussed that a drop down list is a collection of list item objects. And then if you remember, if you look at this method data bind repeater, we are actually creating list item objects here. But then the first thing to do here is, let's change this name of the method. Instead of calling data bind repeater, I'm going to call this data bind DDL page numbers, because we want to bind the page numbers to the drop down list page numbers. Okay, and then what I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of this list item objects because I'm going to add them in line to the drop down list. And look at that, if the total pages is greater than 1, meaning if there are more than 1 pages, then what I'm going to do, I'm going to add that page. Remember, a drop down list is a collection of list item objects, and on our webform1.aspx, this drop down list, which is basically which we are basically using to display page numbers, the ID of that is DDL page numbers. So to this drop down list I want to add those list items. So I'm going to say DDL page numbers dot items dot add. So what we are going to add, we are going to add a new list item. Now if you look at the constructor of the list item that we are using here, it takes in it uses the constructor that takes in 3 parameters: the text, value, and whether if that list item should be enabled or not. Now since we are going to display all the pages available within the drop down list, we don't want this enabled, the boolean property to be used. So I'm going to get rid of that last property there. So I'm just going to use the text and the value of the list item object and add that to our drop down list. Okay, and another thing that I want to do is, look at that, if the total pages are greater than 1, then what we are doing, we are adding the items to the drop down list. If on the other hand, if the items are is equal to 1, or if there's only 1 page, then there's no point in having the drop down list enabled. Let's say for example I have only 5 rows within the database table, then we display all the 5 rows on the first page. So at that point, users, there's no point in showing this drop down list. We want this drop down list to be disabled because there's only 1 page and that's displayed. Okay, so if the total pages is only 1, then what I want to do, I want to set DDL page numbers dot enabled is equal to false. And another thing that I want to do, let's say for example I was on the second page when the page size was 3, for example, and then now when I change the page size to 5, there are, let's say, 4 rows, then all the 4 rows will be displayed on the first page, and then I should automatically flip this page number back to 1 because there is only one page to be shown. So that's why we want to set the selected item to the first item within the drop down list. And to do that, I'm going to say ddl page numbers dot selected index is equal to 0, which will be the first page within the drop down list. Now if the total pages is equal to 1, then we are disabling the drop down list. On the other hand, if it's greater than 1, we should enable it back. So what I'm going to do is, if the total pages is greater than 1, then we should enable that. So set enabled is equal to true, and then look at that, we are adding the items to this drop down list every time the total pages is greater than 1. So obviously before we do that, we should clear any of the existing list items that the drop down list has. So I'm going to say ddl page numbers dot items dot clear, which is going to clear the list items. Okay, so those are the changes that we need to do for DDL, data bind DDL page numbers function. Now obviously we need to invoke this function wherever required. Now another thing, remember we have got rid of the pager, the repeater control from this web form, and then this repeater control was actually using link buttons to display page numbers at the bottom of the grid view control. And when I click on that link button, this event handler method was called link button underscore click. Now we are not using that link button anymore and the repeater, so I can get rid of this event handler method altogether. So let's delete that away, and we renamed data bind repeater method to data bind ddl page numbers. So the first thing to do, we have to update the references wherever that method is being called. So here I'm going to call it data bind ddl page numbers, and look at this, if not is post back in the page load event, meaning if it's the initial get request when the web form loads, I want the page size of the grid view control to be 5, which we have set at design time anyway, and then the page number should be the first page number. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, you remember this employee.dataAccessLayer, which is invoking this getEmployees method. And if you look at the parameters of this method, the first parameter is going to be the page index. You can either say gridview1.pageIndex, or I can simply hardcode the value as 0, because we want the first page to be displayed when it is the initial get request of that web form. And then the page size, again I can hardcode that, or we can use gridview1.pageSize. So I'm going to hardcode that for now. And then similarly, when I call this data bind ddl page numbers method, look at that, what parameters is it expecting? Page index, page size, and total rows. So for the page index in the page load, if it is the initial get request, it's going to be 0, and the page size is going to be 5. Okay, so that's the change within the page load event. And then we have modified the ddl page numbers function. Now sort grid view function, this is not going to change in any way, but then gridview1 underscore sorting function will be changed. Now the first thing is, obviously we don't have data bind repeater function, instead it is data bind underscore ddl page numbers function, and we need to pass the page index and page size to this function, as well as get employees method of employee data access layer. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to compute the page size and page index. Remember, when I am sorting the grid view control, so when I click on these the hyperlinks to sort the data, then where should I be getting the page size and page numbers from the respective drop down lists on this web form? And the drop down list for the page size is ddl page size, and for page numbers it's ddl page numbers. So I'm going to say int page size, I'm going to get that from ddl page size drop down list. And how am I going to get that? Using selected value property, but selected value returns a string back. As you can see in the IntelliSense here, we need to convert that to an integer, so I'm going to use int.parse to do that. Alright, and the next thing that we need to do, we need to compute the page number. So page number is equal to, where do we get that from? There's a drop down list called page numbers, DDL page numbers, and dot selected value. Again, we get a string back. We need to convert that to an integer, so int.parse. And the most important thing to keep in mind here is, look at this, within the drop down list we will display page numbers as 1, 2, 3, etc. But then remember, the grid view control page index starts at 0. It's 0 index based. So we need to subtract 1 from the page number that we retrieve from the drop down list. Okay, so I'm going to subtract 1 from that, and then we'll use these variables and pass them to getEmployees method and DDL data bind DDL page numbers method. So here the page index is going to be page number, and page size is obviously going to be page size. Let's do the same thing for DDL page numbers as well. So page index is going to be page number, and page size is going to be page size. Alright, okay. With these changes, let's go ahead and run this and see how far have we got. There's more to do, but at this point let's see what actually is happening. So now look at this, when the web form loads, the page size is 5. Now when I select the page size as 10, is the grid view control refreshing and showing the correct pages? No. Why? Because we haven't implemented the selected index changed event of this drop down list control. So let's go do that. So obviously now we have this drop down list. When I double click on the drop down list, we should have the event handler method generated, DDL page size selected index changed. Now just to speed things up, I have the implementation of this method already typed. Let me copy and paste that. Now again, it's going to be straightforward. Now when I select a page size from the drop down list, what should happen? The web form should post back, and we should pass the page size and the page number to getEmployees method of the employees data access layer, and then retrieve the data, bind it to the grid view control, and then obviously populate the page numbers as well, because once you change a page size, the number of pages will have to change in it. So let's look at the implementation. So if you look at this implementation, so we are creating a variable of type integer total rows, and then look at that page size. We are retrieving the page size from DDL page size drop down list using the selected value property, and then page index, I'm setting that to 0. Remember, when we change the page size of the drop down list, the number of pages will change. Okay, so that's why I'm initializing the page index to 0, and then whatever is the page size that we have selected within the drop down list, we are setting that as the page size for the grid view control. And then what we are doing, we are passing in the page index and page size to getEmployees method of employee data access layer, and then invoking the data bind method and data bind DDL page numbers function. To this we need to pass page index, page size, and total rows. Okay, so that should fix that problem. Whenever I change selection within the page size drop down list, the correct number of rows should be displayed within the grid view control. The next thing is, obviously, when I change the page number in the page number drop down list, then we need to be able to navigate to correct page which in the grid view control. So let's go ahead and implement that drop down list selected changed selected index changed event as well. So let's go to our web form 1. So there is the drop down list. Let's first set the auto post back property to true for this drop down list, because we want the web form to be posted back automatically. And then let's double click that to generate the event handler method. Again, I have the code already implemented for this one, so let's copy and paste that within this event handler method. So again, what we are doing here, we are creating a variable of type integer total rows, and look at that, I'm getting the page size from the drop down list page size using the selected value property, converting that to integer. Similarly, I'm getting the page number from the drop down list. And remember, page numbers within the drop down list starts at 1, but grid view page number is 0 index based, so we need to subtract 1 from the drop down list page number value. And then we are setting the page size to the grid view page size. And finally, we are passing the page index and page sizes to get employees method, invoking the data bind method of the grid view control. Okay, all right. So let's go ahead and run this. Now you may be wondering, so if you look at this event handler method, when the selected page size changes, we are calling data bind DDL page numbers, which computes the total number of pages and binds that to this drop down list. So when the page size changes, we are computing the page numbers. But then when I select a page number within the drop down list, why are we not calling this data bind DDL page numbers function within this event handler method? That's because here I am only changing the page that I am on, so the page numbers is not going to change in any way. So that's why there is no need to invoke this data bind DDL page numbers in this event handler method. DDL page numbers selected index changed event handler method. That's why we are not calling that. So with these changes, when we run this, it should all work as expected. So when the web form renders, it should display 5 records and should be on the first page. Now if you look at the number of rows that I have in this table, at the moment I have 11 rows in TBL employee table, and the page size is 5, so obviously there should be 3 pages. And if I navigate to the third page, I should have only 1 row. On the second page, I should have 5 rows. And notice that by default it's sorted by employee ID in ascending order. Now let's set the page size to 10. Now I should get 10 records within the grid view control, and you can see that. And when I navigate, when I look at the page number drop down, just look at that, I have only 2 pages. And in the second page, there should be only 1 row. Okay, now look at this. When I set the page size to 20, look at what happens to page number drop down list. Look at that, all rows are shown on the first page because there are only 11 rows. We see all the 11 rows. And look at the page number drop down list. This is disabled now because there's only 1 page and I'm looking at that. I have no option of navigating to any other page because there's only 1 page. Okay, but on the other hand, now if I flip it back to 5, look at that, the drop down list is re-enabled, and then I got all the 3 pages. Okay, so let's change it back to maybe 15, and look at that, the sorting works as usual. Alright, and if I put it back to 5, I sort by name. Look at that, it's sorted in ascending order. And if I go to the last page, I have Valerie, which starts with V because the name is in ascending order. If I click on descending order, look at that, Dave is the name, and then it's sorted in basically descending order. Okay, and one more thing here, look at that, the page number, I'm on the third page, but look at this one, it's actually showing page 1. Okay, now I want to have the page number 3 selected within this drop down list. So is there a way of doing that? Absolutely. Within, when we sort the data, so we get the page number here, and we are passing that page number to this data bind DDL page numbers drop down list. Okay, so which is going to bind, based on that page number page size, it's going to do its basically compute the number of pages available and bind it to this drop down list. And at that point, what we can basically do is DDL page numbers dot selected value is equal to that page number. So let me go ahead and run this. Oh, selected value is a string, so we need to convert this to string. So let's run this now and see if it's gonna work. Okay, so we are on page 3, so it's sorted by employee ID in ascending order. Now let me actually sort in descending order. Look at that, name sorted in descending order, and Okay, so we have a problem here. Instead of showing the last page number, it's actually showing page 2. Why is that? Because again, the same concept within the drop down list, the page numbers starts from 1, but in the grid view control, the page, sorry, not the page size, it's the page index. Within the drop down list, it starts at 1, but within the grid view control, it starts at 0. So obviously, when we are setting the page number, you know, within the drop down list, the selected value within the drop down list, then we need to increment that by 1 before we actually set it as the selected value. Now this should correct that problem. So let me run this now. So the data is displayed by employee ID in ascending order. Let's go to page number 3 and then let's sort it by name. Look at that, it's sorted by name in descending order, and I am still on third page. Now I can go to the first page. I get the names in, the names that I expect to be there. Alright. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.